Welcome to the Back in Time podcast with Kyle and JD, where every week we jump into our DeLorean, cruise to 88 miles per hour, and travel back in time to review our favorite films from all genres and bring you celebrity interviews every single week.
Very good, Lewis. Short but pointless.
Pizza dude's got 30 seconds.
You want me to yank you out of that seat and shake it out of you?
I don't have it. Screws fall out all the time. The world's an imperfect place.
And now, here is your host, Kyle Autry, and his co-host, JD. All right, welcome back to the Back in Time podcast. My name is Kyle Autry, joined as always by my co-host, JD, on the line. We've got a special top 5 episode. JD, how you feeling about the top 5 tonight?
I am definitely nervous. This is going to be one of the more difficult top 5 lists that we've come together to create. And part of that is the notoriety of the special guest that we have on this episode, who is an expert in the category.
Yes, we do have a very special guest on, and he was on just a couple days ago talking about his new book. And you can check that out in our archives right now. Download, listen to the episode. But welcome back to the show, Chris Clues. Chris, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Thanks, guys. I always appreciate the 80s pop culture expert. I think, as I tell people in conferences when I speak and they ask me, I say, how does one become an 80s pop culture expert? I don't know that it's, everything about 80s pop culture as much as you kind of have to live through the decade because it means wearing parachute pants and members only jackets. And if you could actually get through that along with maybe a rat tail as a hairstyle, then you can consider yourself an 80s pop culture expert in my mind.
I love it. I was texting Chris earlier in the day telling him I'm really looking forward to his list because I was a baby in the 80s, so I didn't get a chance to go watch these movies in theaters. So a lot of my movies, everyone's going to be like, oh, that's not even that underrated. I don't know. I'm guessing on a lot of these. I'm going off of numbers and response to the movies, but I know Chris is going to know movies that he saw in theaters that just never took off, and we're all going to be like, oh my God, I have no idea what that is. Where is it? How can I watch it? That is what I'm looking forward to most. So, so if you guys haven't figured it out, we are talking about the most underrated movies of the 1980s, and we're going to give a top 5 list. So here's how we'll do it. Chris, since you are our special guest, we're going to let you lead it off. I'm going to go second. JD will bring up the rear as he normally does. No pun intended, JD. And we'll go ahead and talk about each other's choices. We'll probably get ragged on by Chris because he knows more than we do. We'll see how this goes. So, Chris.
I would never rag on you guys. I think I am always impressed by the amount of 80s knowledge that you have in general, because I can tell you that, being an 80s kid, I don't have nearly as much knowledge of the 60s and 70s as you guys do of the 80s. So, I got to give you guys some credit there, because if somebody asked me to do a 70s movie roundup, there's just no way I could do it. Save a few of the ones that everybody knows. Okay. So I'm going to start. Are we doing this in order like we did before, number 5 to number 1?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So my number 5 most underrated 80s movie is going to be The Last American Virgin. And not just because Diane Franklin wrote the foreword for my second book and she was one of the main characters in it, one of the 2 main characters, Karen, but because The Last American Virgin, you hear the title and you immediately think it's going to be a typical kind of 80s raunchy coming of age comedy. And there is some of that in there, of course. Like Fast Times at Ridgemont High and Porky's and movies like that were so popular, Class, during the 1980s, particularly before, say, 1986, 1987. The Last American Virgin just does everything so well. And one of the reasons I call it one of the most underrated is because when you think about the coming of age movies from the 80s, it never gets mentioned. But it should get mentioned because, A, it has quite possibly the best soundtrack of any 80s movie by far. And number 2, it's the ending is an ending that every single one of us can relate to when it comes to our teenage years. And it's not a happy ending. So it doesn't wrap itself up in a nice little romantic comedy ball and say, okay, everybody's happy and everybody good. It ends in a very real way that all of us can look at it and say, yep, I was that guy or I was that girl. Totally.
JD, what do you think about his pick?
I think it's a great pick, and your sort of description of why it's applicable and why it's such an underrated film it's spot on, and there's really not much I can add other than it's a great pick. I'm curious to what Kyle has on deck, and I know my number 5 is going to get booed. I'm just going to throw that out there, but maybe Kyle has the same number 5 as me. We'll find out.
Okay. This may get me some hate here. We are in 1982. We are looking at a horror movie that was also a sci-fi movie. And I am talking about Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. Now, Chris, I'm going to tell you, I bought that movie probably in the year 2000. It sat on my shelf for 19 years without me watching the movie. We just covered it this month on the podcast, actually last month in October. And I was blown away at how much I actually enjoyed the movie. And I actually think that they were a little bit ahead of their time. Because if you think of shows like American Horror Story, where they change out the story every year, but they have a lot of the cast returning, Halloween 3 did some of that. Jamie Lee Curtis is in it. Annie Brackett from the original Halloween, who gets killed off, is in this movie. And I really like the direction that they were going. Unfortunately, the audience did not, because they only pulled in $14 million and it was pretty much panned critically. So we got the return of Michael Myers in Halloween 4, and they did away with this version of the story. But yeah, I just think Halloween 3 Season of the Witch is super underrated.
I like that pick. I agree with you. They went in a completely different direction. I think for people that don't know, it has really nothing to do, or very little, if anything, to do with the other Halloweens. So that's what made it really cool and very different. Yeah, that's a good pick, actually. Really good. Particularly with American Horror Story 1984 out there right now. Yep,
and I've been watching a little bit of that show. I think it's really good. Now, let me ask you this. Did you see Halloween 3 in theaters? Did you rush out to see the newest Halloween?
I did not. That was 1984?
82.
82. I was 12. I could have snuck in. We did actually do that quite a bit. We'd buy a ticket for one movie and sneak into another one. I did not see it in the theater. I wasn't quite at the point yet where that was going to happen at 12. So
totally understandable. All right, JD, let's throw it over to you. What do you have for number 5?
So I think I may have taken my list in a different direction than you gentlemen. And for my number 5 pick, I am heading into 1987. I'm also starting with a sequel movie. It's the debut film of Jason Bateman. I think it's the far superior Teen Wolf 2.
Oh, God's sakes.
Now, I really think this is an underrated movie, and we've done a lot of sequels on the show before. And sequels tend to run into two distinct problems. Either the film is too much like the original, and so it's panned for being repetitive, or like in your pick, Kyle, it's nowhere near like the predecessor, and therefore it's panned for not being like what came before it. And Teen Wolf 2 has pretty much the same story told in a different direction, but with Jason Bateman and in college and with boxing. And it's got a really cool dance montage in it. So you can't tell me I'm wrong.
In my best Jason Bateman voice, well, pal, I don't like your pick at all at Teen Wolf 2. I don't know that it should be rated. I don't think it's a great movie. And
okay, but we're talking underrated movies, and when you ask people about Teen Wolf, they either think of the modern TV show or they think of the original. They don't even know there's a sequel. That's like the definition of underrated.
They probably should know about it, but okay, we'll let that's your pick, man.
Yeah.
Chris, any thoughts on Teen Wolf 2? Not TWO, but TOO.
TOO. I'm going to be honest with you. I never saw it. I never saw it, and I really did love Teen Wolf. I actually did love that movie, and I still enjoy it. It's just It's just good humor, and I don't know. I really enjoyed Teen Wolf, but I did not see Teen Wolf 2. Although now that it's on your top 5 underrated, I'm going to watch it, and I will let you know.
See, I think this is in the spirit of underrated. We're discovering movies, Chris, that you haven't even seen.
Yeah.
That should be on your radar.
Yeah, I'm going to watch it. I'm not afraid to admit when I haven't seen something, and I never watched it, but I'm going to now. And I'll report.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Good luck to you, Chris. Okay, let's go to number 4. What do you have as your number 4 pick, Chris?
Okay, number 4. I am struggling between 3 and 4 here, but with number 4, I'm actually going to go with this is one of my favorite movies from the 80s, and it will likely be in my 3rd book. But I call it underrated because when people talk about the great sports movies of all time, they don't mention this one, and they should. And it's Vision Quest.
Okay. Wow, I thought you were going to pick a movie that was on my list. I got really excited. I do not know anything about Vision Quest. Do tell.
Vision Quest. You have got to put this on your list, especially because you're an athlete. You've got to put this on your list. It's a wrestling movie. It's Matthew Modine. He plays a character who, besides the name Clarence Worley, which is my favorite movie character name of all time, or one of my favorites, Loudon Swain is his name. And I just think, I never had kids, but man, if I ever had a boy, I would have named him Loudon in a heartbeat. Loudon Swain. And so the story goes that there's this wrestler named Shoot, and Shoot has never been beaten, and he's Matthew Modine is in his senior year, and he wants to leave his mark. So he decides to cut weight to wrestle Shoot and try to be the first one ever to beat him. And that's really the story, and it's a really great story. Linda Fiorentino, who was like a real kind of iconic 80s actress, is in it. Couple of things about it that are really cool that I think not only is it underrated from a sports movie, but you kind of got to see it to appreciate a couple of things in it. One is that Michael Schaffling plays Cooch, who is Loudon's buddy. Michael Schaffling, for those of you that don't know, was Jake Ryan in 16 Candles, and he kind of disappeared. He went off and did his own thing. We talked about that in a previous episode. So Michael Schaffling is Cooch. And there's a very young Madonna who plays a club singer in a bar, and she does the song "Crazy for You," and so she's in the movie as well. Forrest Whitaker has a small part in it also, and it's a great sports movie with an amazing soundtrack for anybody who works out. You've got "Lunatic Fringe" by Red Rider. You've got "Change" by John Waite. You've got Journey. Oh man, this song is slipping my mind right now.
Don't Stop Believing?
No, it's not Don't Stop Believing. It's oh man. It's a Journey. Anyway, it's a Journey song that's a great workout song. So you've got a great soundtrack. You've got great actors getting their start. You've got a great storyline. And there just haven't been many movies about wrestling. There was Foxcatcher a few years ago, but that was really dark. This is kind of a really fun 80s movie.
Not to go off on a tangent, but I went down the Foxcatcher hole, and I went deep down the hole. I watched 2 documentaries. I read a book. I watched the new movie with Steve Carell. That is a very interesting, very screwed up story. Disturbing. If you ever want to go down that rabbit hole, but you will go down deep. I will warn you on that.
Disturbing. Yeah.
Yes. Disturbing to say the least. So I love that pick. Yeah. As a sports guy, the fact that I don't know about this and I put it into Amazon Prime and Netflix and was like, we don't have this, but you also might like The Fighter and Miracle, and they're recommending movies like that, tells me that this is a really good underrated movie. So I love the pick.
You're going to love it. You're going to love it. Guaranteed.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure you're going to love my number 4 pick, but I'm going to give it a whirl here. So we are in 1985. It's a comedy film directed by Carl Reiner. This is actually the highest grossing movie on my list. It did pretty well, but I feel like this is the most underrated John Candy movie. So he is playing Jack Chester. He's got 5 paid weeks off. They decide to go down to the sandy beaches of Citrus Cove, Florida. And I am talking about the 1985 film Summer Rental.
Great pick.
I love this movie. It's got a score from Alan Silvestri, which we would know from Back to the Future. And I just think it's really underrated. I think it's a good family movie, number one. It's obviously a very funny movie because you have John Candy just at his best. He's hobbling around. He's pouring his cooler water all over people on the beach. They're staying in the wrong house, getting kicked out. I mean, it's just, and then to end it with a race, and they have to get this old rickety boat running that's now serving frozen fish. I don't know. I just feel like this is super underrated. It only has a 13% on Rotten Tomatoes, and it's probably the one movie people don't really talk about when they talk about the legacy of John Candy.
And the best sunburn in the history of movies.
I would agree with that. Like, if anybody gets really sunburned, there's likely a GIF of John Candy also very sunburned that follows.
Yes.
So, yeah, JD, what do you think about my number 4?
I'm gonna pull a Chris Clues here, and that's off my radar. I've never seen that, and I know you've talked about it before, and I know you've irked me about watching it before, and so now we should also title this list as "Watch This Movie, Fuckface."
Okay, very nice. I don't know that this is available to stream anywhere, so I don't know how you would find it other than the old-fashioned way of go over to Amazon, buy Chris's book, and then bundle that with summer rental and just have it delivered right to your door.
Sounds perfect.
That's a great way to do it. So, JD, let's slide over to you. What do you have for number 4? Dare I ask?
So, yeah, my number 5 pick was a little bit rambunctious, to say the least. My number 4 pick is a little bit more, I say, conservative in the way that your pick was, still a winner. Is probably the same as you, most budget-friendly movie, but it's something that, in talking to the majority of people, they haven't seen or are unaware of for some reason still. So I'm heading to 1989, and feel free to shout out when you know what it is, Chris. We're talking Tom Hanks, Bruce Dern, Carrie Fisher, Corey Feldman, and director Joe Dante. Anybody?
You will get no argument from me. I don't know that that's underrated, but I absolutely love The Burbs. Also in our archives. Great episode.
Yeah, to me, it's really...
Yeah, it's a good one.
It's a great movie. It's one of the movies that I would put as a perfect film. And because the way that it mixes genres so much, it's almost like an episode of The Twilight Zone. You're laughing your ass off at some parts, then you're Googling Carrie Fisher at other parts, and then sometimes you're just scared witless, and then there's actual murders. It's just, it doesn't belong in 1989, and yet it's perfect for 1989. And I struggle to find people that have seen it, let alone love it as much as we do.
I think that's a great choice. And I started thinking about movies that kind of remind me where they do the kind of the genre kind of overlap or genre bending, if you will. And I think movies like The Ref, which came a few years later with Dennis Leary and Kevin Spacey, remind me of The Burbs because they did have kind of the humor, the darkness, the what is happening right now type of stuff.
Yeah, like I said, you'll get no argument from me. The Burbs is a fantastic movie. I love that movie. And it shot completely on the Universal lot. So if you ever go take the backlot tour, you're likely going to be on the set, which is kind of cool.
That's right.
So check that out if you're ever in the California area. It's worth the money.
Good fact. Yeah.
Okay, Chris, number 3. What do you have?
Wow. Okay. So now we're getting down to the nitty gritty. Number 3, I am going to go with My Bodyguard. And this was in 1980, not the Whitney Houston, Kevin Costner Bodyguard. Just to be clear, that is not on my list of any list for that matter. But My Bodyguard. So this was, have you guys heard of this one, by the way?
I'm clueless on this one.
I know I saw this movie probably when I was like 5 years old. This was definitely my grandfather took us to Blockbuster to rent it movie.
Okay, yeah. So My Bodyguard, classic, 1980. And there's a couple of reasons that I feel like it's underrated. Number one, it's just not mentioned as one of the iconic 80s movies, and it was just at the turn of the decade. But it has Chris Makepeace, who had a pretty good early 80s career. He was in Meatballs, I think is probably the biggest movie that he did. And Adam Baldwin, who's continued to do good work, and a very, very young Matt Dillon. So good cast, really, really good movie and good lesson. I think way ahead of its time in terms of lessons on bullying, about a kid that comes to a new school and gets, basically harassed and threatened by a bully. And then he convinces the tough kid in the school, the most feared kid in the school, to be his bodyguard. And it's a really, really good movie. Joan Cusack, a young Joan Cusack, is in it. It's well worth the price of admission, whatever the price is. I love it. I think it's got some really great lessons for today. I think it's a movie that should be shown in every middle school before kids get to high school. I think they should be showing this movie.
I'm just going to cut you off, Kyle, because I hate you. Or is that too negative?
You're good.
No, just because, having seen this movie and having not seen it in the longest time, I remember really responding positively to it. And I love the way that you describe it, because there's a simplicity to movies that came out in the 80s that is sort of lost a lot of times now.
Yeah.
Where you can pitch that story in one sentence and you know exactly what's going to happen, but still be surprised as you go along the journey. It's high concept, but simple.
Yep, totally. Yeah. And, the kid who played Chris Makepeace's character, he's the kid who gets bullied. His name is Clifford Peach. I mean, you couldn't have come up with much better name to, for a kid that was going to get bullied. So, and I can say that because my dad wanted to name me Francois Jaffray, which would just been the end of me. So I can tell you that, it's a very, very good movie. Well worth the price of admission.
My point that I wanted to jump in on, it's actually ranked 45th on Entertainment Weekly's top 50 best high school movies ever. And it does cash in with an 83% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes. So, yeah, this sounds like a really good movie that I am definitely going to be checking out. So add that to my list as well.
Awesome.
All right. Well, I'm going to jump over to my number 3. I don't think this will come as any surprise to JD. It was one of the first movies that we ever covered on the podcast. And it comes from a very underrated director, a very scoffed at movie when it came out in 1987. It took 20 years to really catch on. But then when they released the DVD deluxe edition, it was the highest grossing DVD ever from Lionsgate. I am talking about the 1987 American comedy horror film, The Monster Squad.
Oh, yeah.
Love this movie. I think it's totally underrated. It only made $3 million at the box office, and then it was just a cult classic, hooking up. I think it was HBO, and then just box office video, Blockbuster rentals, all the way back. This was our 3rd episode, Chris, that we ever did on the show. I actually had an email from Fred Decker because I reached out to him to get an idea of like what type of money it made with box office rentals and things like that. And he said the only thing he knows is that copies of the movie would mysteriously disappear from video rental stores only to turn up in people's own home collections later on. When they went out of business. So it was just a movie that just kept getting replayed and replayed and replayed. And then 20 years later, there's a whole fandom of people that love the Monster Squad. So I don't think it's underrated anymore, but it was for sure underrated in 1987.
Great choice. And there were 2 movies that I thought would come out of you guys when it came to your top 10 underrated. And there were 2 that I had that I was almost sure would be on your list, and that was one. So I'm going to see if the other one comes up.
I love it. Okay, JD, I'm going to pop it over to you. What do you have for number 3?
Yeah, well, first of all, just congrats on the great pick. I'm not going to spoiler alert anything, but that may or may not come up in my list for many of the reasons that you've already stated. So, laugh track. Derek, you guys aren't laughing at my jokes tonight. What's wrong?
We laughed at your Teen Wolf 2. That was a joke, right?
Ah, ha, 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 ha. Yeah, we'll laugh at this one. We're heading to 1983 to what I would call one of my all-time favorite horror movies, like The Monster Squad. It has gained a lot of fire over the recent years and has become something of a cult classic. But come 10 years ago, if you name dropped this movie at a party, you weren't necessarily going to get a lot of people in the know. Talking about one of the most controversial, spooky, scary endings in a horror movie that haunts me to this day, Sleepaway Camp.
I knew this would be on your list. JD is this is well documented on the podcast that he is a huge fan of Sleepaway Camp. And in fact, maybe the only person to ever be kicked out of a Q&A with the director because he asked too many dumb questions.
Are you serious?
It's true. I grilled the hell out of him. And I was like, I jumped to the front of the line. I asked him a question, ran to the back of the line, and I just kept doing it. I kept asking him questions. And eventually he's like, you're done. They just cut me off. And then I took a picture with Robert afterwards, and he knew it was me. And he just has this like face, like, get this asshole out of here.
That's great. Maybe you should try to get him on the podcast.
Yeah, he probably still remembers me as an asshole.
He sees your face just on Twitter. And he's like, nope, I remember that face. I'm not doing this guy's show. Yeah, I think Sleepaway Camp is underrated, actually. I don't think the sequels are. I think the sequels are pretty bad, but we had a great time talking about this. Was another one that we've covered on the podcast. So, yeah, I wasn't surprised to see that on your list. It's not on mine, but it would have been a very close to honorable mention pick for sure. So I like it. Okay. Well, Chris, over to you. Number 2. We are getting down to the finish line here. This had to be tough, but what'd you put at number 2?
Okay, so for number 2, I'm going to dig into, this is interesting because my number 3, number 2, and number 1 all have to do with a similar topic. So my number 2 has an amazing cast. Corey Haim, Cary Green, Charlie Sheen, Courtney Thorne Smith, Winona Ryder, Jeremy Piven. Very, very good cast, right? 1986.
Yep.
Lucas. And if you haven't seen the movie Lucas, again, another one I highly recommend. Really intense movie, though. There are some funny moments, but it's a really great movie about life and about the impact that tragic events can have on a kid and his or her approach to life, school, friends, being an extrovert or being an introvert versus an extrovert, and what that means for a kid who's 14 years old. Great movie. Phenomenal movie. Also has some, bullying themes in it, which was a really interesting that so many movies in the 80s had the bullying themes and so many today have trouble dealing with it. It's very weird, but really great movie. Lucas, totally underrated.
I'm going to piggyback off of that and say I love Lucas. I may be talking about Lucas again here in a few minutes when it comes to my list. But yeah, I think this is a very, very underrated movie. And Corey Haim had a moment in the sun, a period from 1985 to about 1989 where everything he touched was gold. And This is probably his least talked about movie, but might be his best performance out of all of them.
100%. I mean, the fact that he didn't get nominated for this role tells you how much people overlooked this movie, because he really probably should have been. And the budget was $6 million, and I'm looking on IMDb, and only made $8.2 million. So that tells you it just. But it's an incredible movie. Everybody should watch it.
Yeah, I'm in agreement totally with the both of you. It's a fantastic movie. A lot of it filmed outside of Chicago. I've driven past many of the locations, and it's a beautiful film.
Yeah.
And the way that they captured the settings and the environment is just like, I still drive by some of those locales and I'm just like, yep, there it is.
Yeah. That's a perfect way to put it. It's a beautiful film. It really is. And it's kind of weird that the guy who actually, I believe he was the writer. I could be wrong, but I think, yeah, he wrote it. Also wrote The Omen.
Okay.
But yeah, phenomenal movie. Go ahead.
I'm gonna go on a rant really quick, and that's one of my most favorite things about writing, and I think both of you could probably relate and reflect on this a little bit, is good writing and good characters and good story know no bounds. You can write something like The Omen and it could be as powerful as it was, and you can do something like Lucas and it can have just as much power but in a different direction.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I am going to take over my number 2 pick. I will give you guys a hint. It's also a Corey Haim movie. So my 2 and 1 pick are both Corey Haim movies. But number 2 is not Lucas. So I'm going to jump to 1985. Probably my favorite quote in a movie by this actor. I think you'll know it. Good old Uncle Red. I feel like a virgin on prom night. And I am talking about the 1985 horror movie. Very underrated movie, I would say, about a werewolf who's terrorizing a small city where there lives a paraplegic Marty Kozlow, his uncle, his sister, and then there's a narrator who kind of narrates the story. And I am talking about Silver Bullet.
Oh yeah.
So I love this movie. This was something my dad had me watch when I was young, and I've heard that he's also shown it to my nephew who's only 7, who's now having nightmares. So good job on that one, Dad. Yeah, it's just, yeah, if you're watching this when you're a kid, you probably love this as much as I do, because it was just, yeah, it's such an underrated movie. And again, I think Corey Haim does a great job in this movie. And it's not that I'm like this big giant Corey Haim fan, because I'm actually probably more Feldman than I am Haim if we're talking about the 2 Coreys. But I think he's fantastic in this, and I think Gary Busey is even better in this role. So I'm interested to hear, Chris, if this was a movie you saw, because you would have been, 15 at this point, if I'm doing the math correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I did see it, and I was allowed. There were certain movies that at 15 I was pretty much almost allowed to see anything, but there were some exceptions even when I was a few years younger. Anything Stephen King I was allowed to see. My dad just thought he was just an incredible writer, and that a lot of his books and stuff and writing should have been taught in school because his character development is unmatched. And so yeah, since it was a Stephen King movie, I did see it.
What was it like coming out of the theater as a 15-year-old kid after watching Silver Bullet?
I'll be honest, that type of movie didn't scare me as much as the ones that had ghosts or people who were possessed. The movie that terrified me to death that I should have never seen when I was younger was Salem's Lot. And I still haven't watched it again. And that was Stephen King as well. I won't watch it to this day. It scared the hell out of me. Silver Bullet was great, though. Corey Haim, anything Corey Haim, you're right. It was in his sweet spot. That time was his sweet spot. And anything Corey Haim, we were all going to go see. All of us. Everybody.
Okay, great. I love it. JD, let's go over to your number 2 pick. What do you have?
So for my number 2 pick, I'm heading back to 1987. Kyle has already talked about it at length. For me, the Monster Squad was the Goonies of my youth. And we've talked about this both in our Monster Squad episode, and we've talked about it in our Goonies episode. When me and my friends hit the streets on our bikes late at night, we were running away from Count Dracula, and we were hunting down the monsters. And Wolfman's got nards, and you were all the names, just everything about this movie. It was my childhood in a nutshell. And I'm glad that the film has taken a lot of people by storm, as you already mentioned, with its release 20 years later. But it's sad that this film isn't as big as it is, and they keep circling a remake and reboot, and they just never pull the trigger on it. But I think it's prime for today's audience.
I'm going to jump in. Chris, I definitely want your opinion on this. I don't want to see a reboot of this movie, but I would love to see a continuation, because I would imagine that time warp that opens up from the amulet could be reopened at some point. The kids are now adults. Unfortunately, Fat Kid's no longer with us, but the rest of the cast is, and I'm sure they could find a good Fat Kid to fill the role. So
yes, listen, after the Karate Kid came up with a really smart idea of not making it a sequel or a reboot, but actually doing it in real time with the characters at the age that they would be today. And now Coming to America and Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure are doing the exact same thing this summer. I think if they're going to go in that direction, that would be the right direction to go. What I would like to see, in all honesty, is you've got this content. 80s are hot. Just re-release these movies the way they were. Put them in the theater. Even if the tickets are half price, because the theater doesn't have to recoup as much in terms of paying for the movies. They do that in Baltimore. My stepbrother and sister just went to see The Silence of the Lambs, and then I think they saw The Breakfast Club and Say Anything as well at different times. They're re-releasing these movies in these old theaters. I think that's what they should do. But
I would love that. We don't have any theaters out here that do that where I live, and I've actually thought about, if I were to own my own business, that would be something that I would want to do, is have those old movies and make it like an Alamo Drafthouse type of event. But yeah, I love that. Absolutely. Go ahead. Everybody dress up, and if somebody gets an award for the best costume or whatever, Okay, good. Yeah, no argument for me. You're one pick on the list higher than me, JD. So I was at 3, you're at 2. Let's give the rundown here, Chris, before you give your number one pick. So you started with The Last American Virgin from 1982. Then you went to an underrated sports film, Vision Quest. 3, we were in My Bodyguard, not the Whitney Houston movie, folks. Number 2, you were with Lucas in 1986. What is your most underrated movie of the 1980s?
All right. So this one is going to excite JD, because we had a disagreement about a particular character in this movie previously, and whether he was the best bully of all time in a movie. And I say that he was, and you say that he wasn't. And this movie is 3 O'Clock High. I think that 3 O'Clock High is by far the most underrated movie from the 80s. It's just a genius movie with an amazing cast. And what I really love about the movie is that it's all shot in one day. So the premise of the movie basically is that Jerry Mitchell is the kid who runs the school supply store. And for those of you that didn't grow up in the 80s, even in the 90s, schools used to have a school supply store. It's where you bought your pencils and your erasers and all kinds of stuff. You could buy those in the school, before school and after school. And Jerry runs the school store. And so basically the plot goes that there is a kid who comes into the school because he's been expelled from other schools, and the story that he stabbed a teacher in another school, and his name is Buddy Revell, and he's played by Richard Tyson, who was in Kindergarten Cop, amongst others, Black Hawk Down. Jerry Mitchell decides he wants to befriend him, and they're in the boys' bathroom, and he puts his hand on Buddy Revell's shoulder and says, "Welcome to the school," that kind of thing. And he looks at Jerry and he says, "Nobody touches me." And he says, "Now that you've touched me, we're going to fight at the end of the day, and there's nothing you can do about it." And so at that point, Jerry's entire existence is to try to get out of this fight at the end of the school day. And the entire movie is set in one day in the school with this kid trying to get out of the fight at the end. It's a great dark comedy, phenomenal dark comedy with some great quotes.
You mentioned this in a previous episode with us, that this was a very underrated movie. I think we actually talked about doing this episode, and then you told us about 3 O'Clock High, and I'm sad to report that I still haven't watched it, and I'm just as excited this time as the last time you talked about it. So I need to see this movie. Yes. And I just need to figure out how to see the movie.
And then you'll know why Buddy Revell is the greatest bully in the history of cinema.
Okay.
Okay. We haven't got to my number one pick yet. Just saying. But no, Chris, that's a terrific choice. It's a great movie. And again, the simplicity that comes out of storytelling in the 80s, like you said, it's one day, it's one simple thing.
Yeah.
And all the hell that breaks loose as a result.
That's it. Totally.
I love it. So that's a very solid top 5 by Chris. Now, let's give my rundown real quick, and I'll give my number one pick. So I started with Season of the Witch, very controversial movie. Then I went to Summer Rental, John Candy, love that movie. Number 3, The Monster Squad from 1987. Number 2, a Corey Haim movie, Silver Bullet. And number one, hey, maybe one of you guys could stop by sewing class and pick up a thimble because Lucas over here needs a jockstrap. And I'm back in 1986 with Lucas. It's one of my favorite football movies, even though there's not a ton of football that takes place in this movie. It was one of the first sports movies that I really fell in love with. This is where I discovered Corey Haim, which led into movies like Silver Bullet, The Lost Boys, and License to Drive, and Dream a Little Dream, and so many other great movies that he did, a lot of them with Corey Feldman. And it's such a relatable story, like this 14-year-old nerdy kid who, hooks up with, the hot girl in school, Carrie Green, the Goonies. You guys all know her. She befriends him, but, the guy that's supposed to be a friend of hers they're kind of mean to him and they pick on him. And then we get some Charlie Sheen in here, Winona Ryder, like you said, Jeremy Piven. Let's hug it out, bitch. I mean, there's so many good things in here. I had to put it on my list. I wasn't sure where I was going to put it, but I decided before we started it was going number one because it's a movie that I love and we haven't covered on the podcast yet. So, JD, I'm curious if you think this will be one that we get to at some point.
I think given that it appeared on both of your lists, it should definitely be covered on the podcast.
Awesome.
Okay, I love it. Awesome. Well, let's jump over to your list here, JD. Since we've already covered a lot of Lucas, there's not a whole lot more to add there. So, number 5, you started with Teen Wolf 2, and then you went over to The Burbs, the old Universal lot. Number 3, we were camping out at Sleepaway Camp. Number 2, I should say, you were with the Monster Squad and just the Goonies of your youth, like you said. What do you have as your number 1 pick?
I wonder if this is the other movie that Chris was expecting to hear.
I don't know. Let's hear it.
I don't know. Okay, let's head to 1986. And let's get a cast starring Charlie Sheen, Sherilyn Fenn, Randy Quaid, Nick Cassavetes, Clint Howard. Can we get bigger names than this in 1986? We can't. It's The Wraith with the number 1 bully in a movie ever, Packard Walsh.
No, that was not the one that I was thinking of. But I once I mentioned the bully in 3 O'Clock High, I figured this is where you were going.
It had to be. I didn't see this movie until I was in college, and the first time I saw it, we were all just standing on our feet, and 1 second we're cheering for Packard Walsh because he's the best bully in a movie ever, and then we're cheering for Charlie Sheen, then you're cheering for a car, and you're just cheering for everybody. You want everybody to win in this movie. Clint Howard is just Rughead or Carpethead or whatever the hell his name is, and then it's just such a silly yet stereotypical 80s movie. It just encompasses everything between, I think they're in a freaking river canyon gorge at one point rafting for some reason. It's just, I don't know. I look back at the 80s and I think if I had a child and the child was like, Dad, what is the 80s like? And I'd be like, well, I was only in it for a few years, but go watch The Wraith alone in your room and learn more.
Still didn't have the best bully.
What we need to do is we need to come up with, and maybe we talked about this before, and if we did, I totally apologize, but a list of best bullies, or we do a literary analysis and cinematically compare both of them together and give them a score and have people vote on who they would rather get bullied by, and whoever wins then loses. Okay, because Packard Walsh is going to murder you.
That's fine. That's fine with me. Buddy Revell, I'm telling you, Richard Tyson. All you got to do is look at a picture of the guy.
He's a scary dude. Yeah,
in that black leather jacket with the white T-shirt. But The Wraith is a great pick for your number 1. It wasn't the other one it wasn't the second one that I was thinking of from the 2 Monster Squad, but yes, great pick.
Now, did you see this one in theaters? Because you would have been 16 then?
I didn't see it in theaters. I saw it after.
Oh, I can only imagine all the sex that probably happened in the theater.
Not a lot of people saw that movie, though. $2.7 million budget. It only grossed $3.5 million. So it was definitely a very underrated movie. But I would like to add in a name. You guys both have great bullies on your list, but I don't know how we can talk about great bullies and not talk about John Ace Merrill from Stand By Me as one of the great villains in movie history.
Oh yeah,
He was so scary.
Kiefer Sutherland in anything. I mean, just one of the very few guys that can. Kiefer Sutherland and Patrick Swayze. You put them in a movie, and I will go watch it.
There you go.
Touche.
I love it. Okay, now Chris, I know that you had an honorable mention. I do not have one. I could make one up, but I'd rather hear your underrated movie that did not make the list here.
Sure. So, by the way, the other one, there were two others that I thought might come up. One was The Explorers, that I thought one of you might have on your list. And the other one, because you guys have talked about it so much, was The Toxic Avenger.
That's a whole nother list. We can just do underrated trauma movies.
So this movie that I want to put as my honorable mention. Now, this movie is great on so many levels. The genre that I'm talking about, when it's done correctly, can have a huge impact on society and can even win Academy Awards. So the genre that I'm talking about is the serial killer genre, the psychological thriller, if you will. And there just aren't too many of them nowadays. They just, for whatever reason, there's just not a lot of them. And I think that it'll come back around, and I think we'll have a resurgence of psychological thrillers. But right now, there just really aren't any. And so everybody thinks of The Silence of the Lambs when they think of the iconic serial killer movie, and I would agree that that's at the very top. But this one is a close second, and it's called Manhunter. And it came out in 1986. I don't know if either of you guys have seen it or heard of it.
Yep, I saw it after seeing Silence of the Lambs and circled back to it.
Okay. Manhunter, directed by Michael Mann. Now, Michael Mann at the time was doing Miami Vice. So I think this was his first movie. And it has a lot of the feel of Miami Vice, those really kind of those purples and blues and those different colors that he uses in Miami Vice are used in Manhunter, but in a very different way. Now, the movie is based on the book Red Dragon by Thomas Harris, who also had Silence of the Lambs as well. The Red Dragon movie came out in 2000, I think, with Ralph Fiennes maybe. I didn't like the movie. This was the original Red Dragon. It's just called Manhunter. Will Peterson from CSI is the main character. He's the cop that's chasing down the serial killer. Brian Cox plays Hannibal Lecter. Dennis Farina's in it as Jack Crawford. Really just an incredible psychological thriller. He builds the suspense up. And I have to say, besides Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs, the serial killer in this movie is absolutely terrifying because he is a massive human being. He's huge. And his job is developing film in a Photoshop. Now, for those of you that didn't know that this used to happen, you would take pictures with your camera and you would take the film to a shop to be developed. So there's somebody who developed your film. They're seeing all of your pictures. This guy had that job, and he would pick the families that he was going to kill based on the pictures that he saw when they brought their film in to develop. Really, really terrifying, awesome movie. And Michael Mann just has perfect pace in it. And the cinematography is amazing.
I'm writing that down as well. I don't know that I've seen that movie. That sounds really cool.
Yeah, and the serial killer is called the Tooth Fairy. I mean, it's amazing. I love these kind of movies, and this is right behind Silence of the Lambs for me.
All right,
yeah, that's a really good one to include. Obviously, we should also talk about 1 Hour Photo starring Robin Williams.
Yeah.
Maybe underrated 90s movies. Was that 90s?
Yeah, that's definitely 90s, I think.
2002.
Oh, wow, even later.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow, indeed. I think Eric LaSalle was in that.
Just to let you know as well, based on the fact that I call this underrated, the budget was $15 million and it grossed $8.6 million.
Ooh.
But since then, it's done very, very well because people have found it, just like they do a lot of times. So highly recommend Manhunter.
I think this has been an awesome list. I know I have about 4 movies now that I need to watch. Hopefully you guys downloading and listening to this show have found a bunch of new movies to fall in love with. Chris, thanks again for coming on the show, man. We can't thank you enough to give us an hour, 45 minutes of your time to record with us here on a late Monday night. So we appreciate your time, and we hope that everybody goes over to Amazon and checks out your newest book and shows a little love for the what 80s pop culture teaches us about today's workplace, and go buy that book. And then Chris, go ahead and plug all your social medias and let everybody know where they can follow you and find you.
Well, first of all, thank you guys for giving me an hour and 45 minutes of your time. I appreciate you continuing to bring me on, and I love talking to you guys, so I really appreciate it. Yes, so everyone can find me on Instagram, Chris Clues 80s 80s. That's Chris CLEWS 80s. Twitter is at 80s Pop Culture 80s Pop Culture. Then Chris Clues on LinkedIn and on Facebook as well. My website is chrisclues.com, CHRISCLEWS.com. That's where you can find a bunch of information on me, the books, where I'm speaking, my content. If you want to reach out and say hello, you can do it through the website as well. And then the books, What 80s Pop Culture Teaches Us About Today's Workplace, Book 1 is available in paperback and Kindle right now on Amazon. Book 2 will be available on paperback November 6th, which will be tomorrow. It's on pre-sale now, so you have one more day to get it at about a $3 discount when it goes from $15.95 to $18.95 on Wednesday. It's the perfect stocking stuffer for those of you that are starting your Christmas shopping. I know I'm hearing the music already. And then the second book will be available in paperback tomorrow and on Kindle probably by the end of the week.
Okay. I love it. Go check that out. And by the way, we're part of that book. So if you're supporting him, you're supporting us. So go check out the book and buy a copy, and then let us know what you think about it. Follow us on Twitter, and Chris, he's at 80s Pop Culture. We're at Back in Time Pod. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, on Facebook, Back in Time Podcast. You can subscribe to the show for free over at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, CastBox, IGTV, and YouTube. And if you want to follow the blog, hear what JD's talking about or ranting about, you can do that at backintimepod.com. But for now, let's get back into the DeLorean. Let's leave the 80s for now. We'll be back very soon. And let's punch in today's date and return back to present day. Thanks for listening. Have a great rest of the week. See ya.
My username on Xbox Live is actually Packard Walsh, so find me and let's play.
Still not the best bowler.